Welcome in, friends, to Betting Pros College Football Look Ahead for Week 13. I am Chris Welsh. That is Thor Nystrom, and we are here to get you set for Week 13. But Thor, before we even look at it, I have just got to get your take on what the hell happened with Tennessee. I need the Thor reaction as Tennessee lost to South Carolina 63-38. Is going to make a pretty significant move down, at least as far as AP polls were out on Sunday. Might even move outside of the top 10. I think it's looking like 9 right now. But I just want to get your quick reaction on what the hell happened.
Yeah, sometimes when you wave goodbye to teams in the playoff picture, it's like a bittersweet, goodbye. That one, it's like good riddance. If you give up 63 points to a team that literally had 0 running backs left on their roster, South Carolina was playing a tight end as their lead back, and they were using 2 wide receivers as the 2 backups running backs off the bench for the tight end. And then zombie Spencer Rattler, you don't deserve to be within 100-mile radius or 1,000-mile radius of the college football playoff. So, I mean, in terms of that, I'm happy the result that happened and that Tennessee can go back to what was the Steve Spurrier joke? You can't spell the Outback Bowl without UT. They're going to be going to the bowl that they deserve after that performance.
Unreal, and it obviously big implications on it. But we are going to be taking a look at all the Week 13 stuff. You guys are obviously going to be able to get all of your fix during the week, but this is your early look to see if maybe you want to take advantage of a few things, and that has helped out as we have gone. But let's take a look at some action. We've got some action going on Tuesday, Thor. Ball State at Miami of Ohio. Looks like the early line is set around 3, and we've got Bowling Green at Ohio. So what I'm curious about here is what game are you wanting to get in on the action for the action?
Well, all these different games, it seems like every game now, like this time of year, we have injury concerns on both sides that are key for the handicap. In this one, the enormous one, it's Curtis Rourke. Curtis Rourke gets hurt in Ohio's last game. Curtis Rourke is single-handedly this season has led the renaissance of Ohio football. Like after Frank Solich had surprisingly retired, Ohio had immediately gone into the tank after they had been relevant for however many years before that. And then now all of a sudden this year, they're really good again. I think Ohio has 8 wins, and, it looked like they had a really good shot to win the MAC. But now all of a sudden, Curtis Rourke gets hurt in their last game. We don't know what his status is, and now they got to turn around and play on Tuesday. From what I was reading during the week, it didn't look great. But he was able later in the week to ditch the cast he was on, and they said he could at least put weight on it without support. But it's like, damning with faint praise when you're talking about the idea of him having to turn around on Tuesday and play in a game. You're going to have to know Curtis Rourke's status. If you want to bet this game on either side, the kid that they had put in for him, CJ Harris, he actually played okay at the end of Ohio's last game. But, when you're talking over the course of an entire game, it's an enormous downgrade that you would have to bake in for Ohio in this game. So that one is a wait and see for me on the status of Curtis Rourke.
And one thing I want to point out, the circa line that dropped was 5. And
it's all based on Rourke.
Yeah, well, and what's interestingly enough is your adjusted line looks like you've got around 12 on it. But the line, even after Circa released at 5, I'm already seeing it at 7.5. So it's boosted up 2.5 points. So that one, that one, as you're listening, you're probably going to even see a different adjusted line here. But that gives you a little bit of action on that Ohio one if you're going to jump in there. We've also got a game on Thursday. Ole Miss is going to be hosting Mississippi State. Ole Miss is coming off a loss, going to move down in the ranks, going to probably stay inside the top 20, it looks like, but that loss is going to hurt them. What do we got on Mississippi State and Ole Miss coming up for this weekend?
I got the Old Egg Bowl. The Old Egg Bowl on Thanksgiving, a tradition unlike any other. This is a game in September and early October where we thought this Egg Bowl was going to be something. Right? Like at that time, I was like, oh my gosh, this year's Egg Bowl is going to be awesome. The bloom has come off the rose a bit here over the last month. And, yesterday as we're recording, but on Saturday, Ole Miss just absolutely got trucked by Arkansas, an Arkansas team that we had just saw lose to Liberty's third string quarterback. And now Liberty's losing to everyone, even the dregs of the FBS. So it's like, and Ole Miss, of course, was coming off of giving Alabama everything they could handle, but sort of running out of steam at the finish line of that one. it's an interesting style of contrast there, right? Because Mississippi State throws about as much as any team in the nation. And at this point, Ole Miss is running about as much as any team in the nation that does not run a triple option offense. And Ole Miss is, I mean, week by week is skewing even more towards that, both because, Judkins obviously is a stud and they got Evans too, but also to get away from having Jackson Dart put the ball up for grabs, because they're trusting Jackson Dart less and less as time goes on. Can Ole Miss get off the mat for that game, or is Mississippi State in a decent spot to ambush them? I think is what that one comes down to.
Yeah, and Thor's adjusted line is the same as the circle line that dropped.
Oh, the exact one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of those exacts. By the way, like, just with everything going on in my brain, like when I say Thursday, I didn't even register. Like, it is Thanksgiving. Like, Thanksgiving is this week. It feels like it has come up on us quicker than ever before, but that is going to be Thanksgiving. That should be a very good game to check out. But there doesn't really look like there's any lean or advantage at this point. Is there one thing you're going to be looking for, maybe? Are you going to be looking for it to move in one direction, maybe into Ole Miss's favor?
Well, yeah, right now I wouldn't bet that one at all, because there is no, right now you're not going to find line value on either side, but I'm going to be monitoring the line movement for sure to see where the market takes that. And if there becomes value because of where the market has shoved the line. And then of course we're going to get into the handicap during the week, because these are fortunately both these teams are they're straightforward handicaps in that they both skew heavily one way on offense, and their defenses both have straightforward delineated strengths and weaknesses. So we're going to dig into it, and we should find an angle if the market pushes it off where the line where we can find line value on it as well.
If you are looking to track all of your wagers in one place, make sure that you check out Betting Pros Pick Tracker at bettingpros.com/pick-tracking. It syncs up with your sports books to tally which picks are going to hit, which miss, and it gives you a live look at what the public is doing, so you can use real-time tracking to determine which plays to make and which to fade. Get on the leaderboard and quickly become a sharp by using the free advice we have to offer at bettingpros.com/pick-tracking. We got some games on Friday. Black Friday is lots of college football. Coming into last week, number 21 Tulane versus number 25 Cincinnati. We'll see how that shakes out, obviously, when the new polls come out. But Tulane, Cincinnati, Thor, what do we got on this game?
Big game. Yeah. And Tulane, so impressive. A team that I've liked throughout this season, and an extremely impressive performance last time out. We're going to talk about injuries for a lot of these games where they're going to be status checks during the week. Big one in this one, Ben Bryant, the quarterback for Cincinnati, he got hurt in their win over the weekend against Temple. Looks like it was a foot injury that he suffered in the second quarter. The Cincinnati's backup, Evan Prater, came in and mopped that one up at the end. The offense sort of went into the tank when Prater took over. He is definitely a downgrade from Bryant. How serious is that injury? Against a team like Tulane, Cincinnati absolutely needs Ben Bryant. They're going into a gunfight here, and they're bringing a knife in if Prater has to start. So we need to know about the status on Ben Bryant. If it turns out that he is ruled out for this game, the market is going to have a extreme reaction to that.
Over in the Big 12, we got a really interesting matchup where coming into last week, this wouldn't have been a ranked game. The early AP poll looks like they're bringing Texas back inside the top 25, or at least that's where the poll setters are going. And Texas 7-4 is going to be hosting Baylor at 6-5. You've got a line on this, an adjusted line at almost 10. It's a little over 9.5. The circle line opened up at 6. I'm already seeing the line move up to around 7. So what do you think about Texas and Baylor?
Yeah, but with the line opening at 6, I definitely would have bought a ticket on Texas, and beneath 7, I'm buying a ticket on Texas as well. It'll be I'm sure it's going to be at 7.5 by the time people hear this, on Monday morning or whatever. And that's, during the week when we all get into our handicapping, that's the more interesting number, and where probably it should have opened. I think that's what the sports books are realizing now. Like you mentioned, my number on that game is 9.7. I think people we're having a harder time buying in on Texas because the market had bought in on Texas several times this year and then gotten burned. And then they just watched Baylor take TCU a team that had just beaten Texas the week before that and completely erased the Texas offense. They'd seen Baylor give TCU everything they could handle and maybe should have beaten TCU, ended up losing by 1 point, but covered and was covering for most of that game. So I think that's what explains the little discrepancy in the price right there. But I expect the market to correct for that. And like I said, by Monday morning, I think that line is going to be Texas -7.5 or -8. And then it gets into that dead zone between 7.5 and 10. And that's where the handicap is going to get interesting.
Maybe there's going to be something here, especially where the line moves. An ACC matchup that last week had 2 top 25. Believe they're probably going to have 2 top 25 still in here. NC State, who was 24 coming into this past weekend, coming up against number 13 North Carolina. NC State not great in the ACC. North Carolina fantastic at 6-1. Your early line, the adjusted line that you've got on this game, is 6.7. This is battling. I think the circle line opened up at 7. I've seen this adjust down to 6.5. Is there any lean on this ACC matchup?
This is the competition for which of these teams has the bigger fork sticking out of their back right now. Both of them just had abjectly embarrassing performances last time out, particularly so on the North Carolina side. Was like a team that is, over and over again has sort of exceeded expectations this year and has overcome circumstances. And they had, young players in very important spots. Mainly so at quarterback, primarily so with the freshman quarterback, Drake May. And then they get Georgia Tech at home. All they have to do is beat them. And then Drake May's, his dark horse Heisman candidacy continues, and North Carolina's dim, but still legitimate college football playoff hopes are alive if things get wild. And they not only stub their toe, they completely fall on their face against Georgia Tech. And then North Carolina State just continues to absolutely stumble down the stretch. I think North Carolina State has now lost 3 of 5. And one of the 2 wins they had was like by a point or 2 over Virginia Tech, like something like that. And it is just not going well for North Carolina State, not having Devin Leary. I would lean North Carolina, just sort of, not to use the same word, but leaning back on the body of work that we had prior to last week. Whereas with North Carolina State, it's been more than a month now that team has been in the tank. But like you mentioned, my line on that game is North Carolina -6.7. It opens at -7. Now it's gone to -6.5. Like the market is just right around where my number is. So I'm not denoting any line value, but if I had to give a lean, it would be on North Carolina right now.
Last week, or this past weekend, we just had UCLA lost to USC. Big matchup, 48-45, which is going to push them a little bit. Early AP poll doesn't look like much of a loss, but this week they're going up against Cal in a Pac-12 matchup, and there seems to be some advantage, some early lean based on your adjusted line versus what came out on Circa. Circa came out at 10 in favor of UCLA, and you've got a 12.1 to be exact. So do you like this lean for UCLA versus Cal this weekend?
Yeah, that line feels just a little bit short to me. Maybe you could explain it by maybe one of 2 things. Number one, it being sort of the deflate spot for UCLA, because we thought they were going to throw the kitchen sink at USC. It was one reason why I was on UCLA at +2.5, and why a whole bunch of other people out there in the market were on UCLA. And, obviously UCLA came up just short. They lost by 3, and in sort of heartbreaking fashion. They were driving to win the game, and they had gotten to midfield or a little bit over it, whatever it was. And then Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who had been, sort of on his shield the entire game, he goes down on the sword and throws what was sort of a dumb pick, to seal the game for USC. But at that point, he was exhausted. So I'm not sure what he was seeing, but I'm sure that played a part of it. And after you lose that game, you could just see, literally the deflation on the USC side. I'm sorry, the UCLA side. Dorian Thompson-Robinson was crying on the field. He was not the only UCLA player crying. The rest of the guys, they were all dejected. It was all hang dog. Everyone was hanging their head, just, like going off the field like that. UCLA is going to have to pick themselves up off the mat this week if they can. And they come out next week and they give the effort. they play like, they did, heck, if they play like they did last week, they're going to beat California by 2 touchdowns or more. But are you going to get the same effort that you've gotten previously, or are they going to play way down after that deflating loss? And then on the Cal side, I think you have to at least give them just a little bit of extra credit, because they fired their offensive coordinator and their offensive line coach last week, and that had not been going well with the offense. They were making a bunch of wonky decisions, and it was this very straightforward vanilla attack that anyone in the stadium knew what the next play call was basically what it had turned into. And we had documented throughout the season the dead cat bounce with the head coaches, where the week after and in the subsequent weeks after these programs had fired their head coaches, their against the spread record was awesome. Where beforehand it was awful. They had immediately turned it around at the window. And Cal, after they fired those 2 guys, they get the cover last week against Stanford. Actually, it was one of the funner bad beats last week. I wasn't on it, but there were some degenerates out there that were, where the over-under of that game, the folks who were on the under lost it by a half point, because Cal was up by 10 with like 3 seconds left, and Stanford had the ball close to midfield, and Stanford decided to kick a 60 I think
that kick.
Yeah, the 63-yard field goal or whatever as time was expiring, which they didn't have to do, but they kick it, and they made it for the game to go over by half a point, which was just absolutely fabulous. But Cal covered that game anyway, because it was like Cal minus 4.5 or something like that. Cal played a little bit better on offense than they had in previous weeks, is the whole point. So you have to upgrade them just a little bit because of that. So maybe those 2 things explain it, but I'm not sure that I will be able to talk myself into Cal, but it's going to depend on what we see in the market this week, and where we see this line go for sure during the week.
Now, would 1 point of line advantage be enough for you to jump on this Oregon game? You've got Oregon State, big matchup, 2 top 25 teams. Last week, Oregon was 12, 23 was Oregon State, both 9-2, 8-3. Great Pac-12 here. You've got an adjusted line of 4.5. It opened up at 3. I see it around 3.5. Is a point advantage based on your early line in favor of Oregon something that you would jump on early?
No, not in this case, because the lines, or my lines, are set in a vacuum where, like, I don't know the status of the guys 7 days later, right? And so, like, I don't know what Bo Nix's body is feeling like right now. Last week, all the indications we were getting was that Bo Nix was going to miss the game in the middle of the week. And then on Saturday, it turned out he felt good enough in the pregame where they gave him the go. He was able to play. You could definitely see that he was compromised. Bo Nix, like previously, he was a big part of their rushing offense. He did not want to leave the pocket. He didn't want to get hit as much on Saturday. And then there was a couple throws where you could clearly see he was not getting as much oomph into it. One of them was Bo Nix's last interception, a ball that just sort of fluttered on him. And if he was fully healthy, it probably wouldn't have. How did the hits that he took against Utah, how did those affect his injury? If Bo Nix is fully healthy, that's one thing. If he's where he was at last week, that's one thing. If he's worse, that's another thing. And Oregon State, it's not the greatest matchup for Oregon. The other thing is Corvallis is a tricky place to play in, and that atmosphere is going to be juiced up on Saturday. Those fans inviting Oregon into their place now that there's been this resurgence of Oregon football. And by the way, a resurgence of Oregon State football. This is one of the better Oregon State games that we have had in a very long time. So it's going to be juiced up. And the one thing that, Oregon State can bring 2 things into this that are going to give Oregon trouble. Number one, Oregon State plays really good defense. They have the good secondary, and they do the run fits, and they can tackle. So all that stuff, they can address the Oregon offense and make sure that the Oregon offense doesn't become just the runaway train where all of a sudden the yards and the points are piling up and you just can't stop it. And then on the other side, Oregon can run the ball. So they can, and in that way, they can protect their defense, because they can control the clock and stuff like that and keep the Oregon offense off of the field. So it's one of those where I'm going to be getting into the handicap pretty deep this week, and also checking in very closely with the quotes coming out of Eugene to see how Bo Nix is doing.
One more Friday game, and it's going to have Florida State, who looks like they're going to bump up a little bit in the top 25 as far as at least as some of the poll stuff is going after beating Louisiana. Going up against Florida, it's a rivalry matchup. Florida, one of the more dynamic players in college football, in the college football space, and Richardson. There's not much of an advantage as far as early line movement, but what are you looking at in this Florida matchup?
Yeah, my adjusted line in that game is Florida State minus 9.8. I would definitely lean towards Florida State if that line is under 10. I don't like that Florida team. I haven't liked them all year. I faded them against Vanderbilt, and that was about as sweat-free a cover as you get. Vanderbilt obviously won outright as a 14.5-point underdog. Florida, I mean, they got a couple problems, but the biggest one all season has been they have an absolutely horrific run defense. Oh boy, is that a problem facing this Florida State Seminole team. Florida State's rushing offense is really, really good because you have both the efficiency, you also have the explosion, and you also have the fact that the quarterback is a dynamic runner, in addition to the fact that you have like the multiple running backs that can come in. So you always have one that's fresh. So the defense doesn't know who's going to be running the ball. And Norvell, going back to his Memphis days, he always does the interesting stuff with both the blocking in front of the running plays to keep you off the scent, but also, again, with the directional stuff and where the ball is going. This just feels like a really, really bad matchup for Florida. I sort of expect Florida State to trounce them, and I do think there's line value on that if that line's beneath 10.
All right. This is what everybody was probably here for. Ohio State, Michigan, 2 top 3 teams. There is a little bit of an advantage as far as your adjusted line to what came out with Circa, but what are you doing with the biggest college football game of the weekend?
Yeah, looks like this one dropped at Ohio State minus 8 at home against Michigan. My adjusted line on it is Ohio State minus 6.9, but with both these things, we were talking about injuries in a lot of these other games. This one has more of them than, I mean, it's the biggest game of the week, but it also has more of the injuries than almost any of the other ones. On the Ohio State side, we've been talking about their injuries for weeks and weeks, so I could recite theirs like the back of my hand. But the particular ones of note, it's the running back room where they have the guys in and out every single week. So it's like who's playing, who's not playing, whatever. And when they get the particularly bad news, they can get into perilous depth situations. So you want to monitor to see which of the Ohio State running backs get the green light this week and just make sure that they have enough of the top 3 guys that they're going to be fine there. It doesn't look like they're probably going to get Jackson Smith and Jigba, but they haven't had him all season. So, and then, that you want to check on their offensive line and their secondary as well and see if those are jived on the Ohio State side. The Michigan thing, it's kind of unfortunate because they've been dodging some of that stuff. Blake Corum now becomes the enormous question that we're going to be digging into this week. Suffers the knee injury yesterday against Illinois. We just don't know yet. We did not get a lot of information from Jim Harbaugh after that game. I have heard completely conflicting reports about the Corum thing. I've heard some people be like, he's fine. I've heard other people say stuff that he's less than fine. I don't know yet. We're just going to have to wait and see on that. But if Blake Corum does not play in this game, you have to downgrade Michigan. He is the enormous bulk of their offense. And if you take him away, you not only take away a big driving force of their efficiency, you also take away a big driving force of their explosion. And yes, Michigan does have backfield depth. Of course, Edwards, Edwards would be starting on a lot of other FBS teams, and the kids behind there are pretty solid too. It's not like the whole thing goes to crap, but Corum is one of the leading Heisman contenders for a reason. And, too, when Corum's, you got him on the field, of course, then that's one of the ways that Michigan could keep Ohio State's offense off of the field. I'll tell you, if Michigan had been at full strength this week, or if I magically knew that Corum was going to be 100%, I was 100% taking Michigan with the points, and I was probably going to be calling for Michigan to upset Ohio State, because I don't like this Ohio State team. They have been begging to get upset for weeks. and I would even say a month now, they've just been begging every opponent, upset us, upset us, upset us. They finally asked kindly enough that an opponent almost did them the favor of doing it. Maryland almost obliged yesterday, and it came very, very close. Michigan, they don't need to be asked kindly by Ohio State. They will oblige, but without Blake Corum, obviously it complicates things quite a bit. So we'll have to see if Blake Corum is playing or not, changes the equation. If he's not, it's a status check week for this game for sure.
That was my favorite breakdown of any game right there that you've ever had too. Just like they're just asking so kindly to please. It's my favorite breakdown. Let's clip that and put that out there. Just a couple more here. We've got another top, potentially based off of what the AP poll is looking like, 2 top 15 teams in Notre Dame and USC. Again, it is rivalry time. Big dogs here. What do you like in this Notre Dame USC game? Notre Dame looks like they're going to move inside the top 15. AP polls around 13, I think, and USC looking around 5. This is a huge, huge game. What do we got?
USC's been playing with fire too. It's not to the degree that Ohio State has, but yeah, they've been playing with fire, and they've been able to pull some of these games out, or so some of the ones earlier in the season they were just playing bad opponents and stuff like that. But we talked about the UCLA one earlier. This one, it's a whole different matchup, and so if USC can get through this game, I think you have to start acknowledging actually this team might be a legitimate playoff contender, especially if they did that and then they won the Pac-12 title game after that. That's the point where I'd be like, all right, you throw up your hands and yeah, let them in. If there's not 4 more deserving teams above them or whatever. But this is a tough matchup for USC because Notre Dame, UCLA is a finesse spread team just like USC is. It's like fighting with your brother. Notre Dame, it's like fighting with a sledgehammer. They don't play Notre Dame does not play like the Pac-12 teams. They don't, I was making the joke on Twitter last night of I love how beautiful it is that USC and Minnesota, Iowa are the same sport. Notre Dame is a part of that joke because they play completely differently than both USC and UCLA do. Now USC has to turn around after they put all this preparation into UCLA, and they have to play this Notre Dame team, which is all about phone booth physicality. Basically, it's about the downhill running game, and then it's about, do you have anyone on your roster that can cover Michael Mayer? Or that can tackle him once he has the ball in his hands. Man, it's literally just about those 2 things. And then, of course, Notre Dame plays solid defense as well. USC is not going to be traipsing down the field every time they have the ball like they were against UCLA. So it's a totally different equation. It's going to be interesting to see if USC can sustain the same effort and the same, yesterday it felt like we got the A game out of USC. Are we going to get that again against a team that perhaps they don't match up quite as well with, even if maybe Notre Dame in a vacuum doesn't have, they probably have analogous talent to UCLA, just constituted different. My line on that one is USC minus 7.3. But again, styles make fights, and this is a totally different opponent for USC. And I think that Notre Dame matches up better against USC. And like I said, USC's been playing with fire. I think this is a game where it could come down to the end. So, I'm certainly not going to be betting it now. But if that line somehow, if people were betting on USC during the week and it somehow got to minus 7.5, that would be my fire point either way.
The last really quick one we're going to do, I just want to get your take on it. Clemson is going to be hosting South Carolina. South Carolina, is there any chance that South Carolina is going to make this even more messy? Are they going to be the top 10 killer here? And there's a slight edge based on what Circa did, though I know Circa's line opened up around 16. I believe it moved down already. You had a 13.5 line on this in favor of Clemson. Is there anything with a South Carolina bet?
Well, it's funny. This was like 2 or 3 days ago. I had a call with a buddy who's getting his PhD at South Carolina, and I told him, I said we're going to make so much money during bowl season because South Carolina is going to get smoked this week, and they're going to get smoked next week against Clemson, and nobody's going to realize the only reason they keep getting flogged is because Marshawn Lloyd is out, Christian Beal-Smith is out, and their other running backs are out. And so they like, and the best thing about the South Carolina, the only thing they could do on offense is run the ball, but they actually have a really good rushing offense when they're at full strength. It's just Spencer Rattler had stunk all year, but when they had the rushing attack going, Rattler could at least do enough to get you by where they could be competitive. Because the thing with South Carolina, they play decent defense and they have an awesome special teams unit. I think it's number one in SP Plus in the nation. Like they have the whole beamer ball thing going. So they always win the field position game and stuff like that. They block kicks. They're going to steal the kick return touchdowns and different stuff like that. So they're a really tough team to play. And then South Carolina, even though they didn't have any running backs, they go out and annihilate Tennessee. So now my whole theory or whole plan of ambushing the books with South Carolina in bowl season once they got back Marshawn Lloyd and Christian Beal-Smith and had a full running back room, it's not going to work anymore. Now it seems like my line value is going to go. It also seems like the market's doing the right thing with this game of pulling this line back. But again, I hate to say this for every game, it's just true. This is another status check game. For South Carolina, you have an enormous deflation spot here. Usually we just say that, but in this one, you can just listen to what the players said. Spencer Rattler, after that game, so rarely the players get me to laugh out loud with the quotes that they say. Spencer Rattler actually got me to laugh out loud with something that he said after that game, because he told reporters afterwards, and keep in mind that Spencer Rattler went into that game with an 8-9 TDI-INT ratio. He told reporters that it was one of the greatest wins in college football history. And I was like, okay, Spencer. Yeah, okay. Now you have a positive TDI-INT ratio, Spencer. We'll give you a little sticker. Congrats on the win, but bro, let's pump the brakes a little on that. But let's just say the party in Columbia went on deep into the night on Saturday night, and now South Carolina has to turn around and play Clemson. You would definitely expect the effort to be weighed down. But then again, South Carolina has been having to play tight ends and wide receivers at running back when, again, the only thing they could do on offense before was run the ball. Now, if they get Marshawn Lloyd back, Marshawn Lloyd is a legitimate NFL running back. Marshawn Lloyd is a friggin' stud. So if they get him back, and now if Spencer Rattler people need to get out of their mind that Spencer Rattler could, I saw stuff on Twitter last night of is Spencer Rattler back on the NFL radar? Get that out of your head. He's going to, next year, we can decide on that. If Spencer Rattler declares for the draft, he's a moron. Next year, if he comes back and he strings together 7 straight good games, then we can talk about if he's back on the NFL radar. The answer to that question right now is categorically no. He came into yesterday with a 7-8 TDI-INT ratio or whatever, or 8-9. But it's like, if his play now is at least he's not going to play like he did against Tennessee, and Tennessee has an abomination of a pass defense is the other thing. But if his play is going to get at least a bit better now, and then you're going to get the enormous upgrade at the running game, you have to bake that in, even as you're baking in the potential for the deflation spot. And then Clemson just has been what they are. They're a bit unpredictable themselves. They might be in for a small letdown spot. They slapped around Miami yesterday, and Miami, they suck this year, and it was Miami's backup quarterback. But for a program like Clemson, I still feel like slapping around Miami is actually a thing. The whole thing is you need to know about the South Carolina kids if they're playing. If the 2 running backs are out on South Carolina, I'm not betting South Carolina no matter what. It would be Clemson or nothing. But if the 2 South Carolina backs are back and the line value is still there on the South Carolina side, then I might start trying to talk myself into the South Carolina side.
Friends, if you want free picks, player props, and breakdowns on almost every game that college football has got to offer, join Thor and Mike Farrell on Game Day Live, presented by DraftKings, each and every Saturday starting at 10 a.m. Eastern. Have questions you need answered? Our team of experts is going to be live for 90 minutes of nonstop action leading up to the kickoff. So you're going to be join the live stream and toss out your questions, and you're going to get covered. We got you. You can find Thor on Twitter at ThorKU. You can find me on Twitter at IsItTheWelsh, and make sure you are locked into Betting Pros for all the stuff coming up this week, because you're going to want it. For Thor, I am Welsh. That is the Week 13 preview, and we will talk to you guys next time. Bye-bye.